Sweet. So let's jump right into it. Informal conjugation. So lesson 8 content that we're covering today is the informal present tense, the informal negative, informal adjective conjugations, and just some talking about informal conversation in general. I think Dan can be some help on this too. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask in chat or in the comments, and somebody will answer as quick as possible. We're also really quick to answer questions in the Discord. So there's a link to that down in the description. Feel free to join in on the conversation there if you want quick answers to your questions. Twitter's always awesome too. So anyway, the informal present tense, super easy. The informal present tense is just the dictionary form. So if you learn the dictionary form from the dictionary, like when you learn new verbs, if you learn the dictionary form, you've already got the informal present tense. So here's an example sentence. We've got hold on. Ramen taberu. I did that wrong. Ne? Ramen taberu. So I'll eat ramen. Ramen is in katakana, and taberu. Oops, I forgot to add the whatchamacallit, furigana. Anyway, so taberu is just the dictionary form of to eat. And to use it as the present tense, you just say taberu. All right, so my voice is all weird tonight. Anyway, the informal present tense. Particles are often dropped in informal speech. And I always talk about how in a lot of situations you can really just drop particles. So people spend a lot of time worrying about particles. But the fact is that in conversation, they're dropped a lot. And this is even more true in informal conjugation. So when you're talking to your friends, family, etc., particles are often dropped. So yeah, it's even right. Exactly what I have written right here. Ramen. Thank you for writing that in hiragana. So the informal negative, which is the main part of this lesson, is pretty easy too. So there's really good news. If you've watched the lesson, which I'll link over here in the replay, of how to conjugate verbs into their mas form, which was lesson 3 and has terrible, is covered very poorly in lesson 3 of the Genki book. We discovered in that lesson that it's actually really easy because there's just a trick to conjugate into the vmas form, which is turning the e sound or the u sound in verbs to the e sound, like the equivalent e sound in that kakiku keiko. So verbs that end in ku become ki, right? Arukimasu. Anyway, there's a trick just like that for the informal negative. So instead of u becoming an e sound, banana ramen, that sounds terrible. The u sound becomes an a sound. So yomu, which is to read, I guess you'd call it the stem for the the negative conjugation is yoma. So mu becomes ma. And then all you got to do is add nai. And you've got the informal negative. So yomanai would mean don't read. So let's go through these one by one. Super easy, but u becomes wa. Now I have a bunch of stars here, and that's because this is the only one that's a little different. You do not change u to a. So the verb, for example, utao, which means to sing, does not become utanai. It becomes utawanai. So you got to be careful with u. It's always going to become wa. So that's the only one that does not conform to this rule. So u becomes wa, utao becomes utawa is the stem, and you add nai. Utawanai is to not sing. Tsu becomes ta, so for matsu, the stem becomes mata. You add nai, matanai, to not wait. Ru becomes da. Of course, as with all conjugations, iru and edu verbs are a little bit different, so that's why we have this star here. But ru becomes da, so noru becomes nora, nai, noranai, to not get on something. Ku becomes ka, so kiku becomes kika, nai, so kikanai, to not listen. Gu becomes ga, once again that's that a sound. Super straightforward. Isogu, which is to hurry, becomes isoga nai. Isoganai is to not hurry. Right? So pretty straightforward. We continue on with the others, and we just saw yomu, which ended in mu. So mu becomes ma. That's the same for nomu, which is to drink. Nomu becomes noma nai. Nomanai, to not drink. Bu becomes ba. So asobu, which is to play, becomes asoba nai. Asoba nai, to not play. Nu becomes na. There's only, once again, two new verbs in the entire Japanese language. Those are shinu and inu. Both mean to die. Sorry. But inu is never used in modern Japanese. 1 second. Man. Maybe this room is too dry from the heater being on all day. I'm not sure. Anyway, nu becomes na, so shinu becomes shina. Shinanai, to not die. Shinanai de kudasai. That's actually a structure we will go over in part 2 of this lesson. So su becomes sa. Hanasu becomes hanasa nai. Hanasa nai, to not speak. And that's all of them, right? So just like all the other conjugations, like I mentioned earlier, ichidan verbs, which are iru and edu verbs, are conjugated a little bit differently than regular do verbs, but it's easy usually, and it's easy in this case as well. All you have to do to make the stem for the informal negative is cut the do in iru and edu verbs. So that's verbs that end with the, so like if you wrote this in romaji, miru, which is to look, would be M-I-R-U, right? So that's an iru verb, because it's got the I. Neru would be written out N-E-R-U, so that's an edu verb. So those are known as ichidan verbs. And for those, you just cut the do. You're left with mi for miru. And you add nai. So miru becomes minai, to not look. Neru, cut the do. You're left with ne, nenai. Okiru, you cut the do. You're left with oki. You get okinai, right? To not wake up. Awesome. So the informal negative also has two irregulars, the only two regulars in the Japanese language, and those are kuru and suru, and those become, respectively, konai and shinai. And those you just have to memorize. Just like in all the other situations, you have to memorize that kuru will become konai, and suru becomes shinai. And that's it. That's all you got to worry about. So the other thing we're covering, if nobody has any questions about what we just covered, the negative. If you have any questions and you're watching this on the replay or you're here now, please leave a comment or ask anywhere else, and I'll answer as quickly as I can. So with that said, we're going to move on to informal adjectives. So the present tense, just for the adjective alone, for the informal conjugation, is just the adjective itself. So you may remember when we covered adjectives a couple weeks ago, that for like the formal usage of it, you would say kawaii desu, right? But if you're just using informal conversation, you could remove the des and just it stays as kawaii, which is cute, right? Or tanoshii, which is fun. Tanoshii, right? You don't need a des. So if you just say tanoshii, it just means fun. It's fun, right? You don't need any des or anything like that. Courtney Kiss Me, ohayo. Good morning. Ohayo gozaimasu. How you doing? Thanks for joining. We just covered how to conjugate into the negative informally, and now we're jumping into adjectives. So adjectives are really straightforward. For the present tense, it's just the adjective. That is the present tense. Adjective, nothing added onto it. For na adjectives, so things like shizuka or kirei, we add da to the end. Before it was desu, right, for formal, but for informal, it's just da. So shizuka da. Da is the informal version of desu. Shizuka da. It's quiet. So the one that's a little bit confusing for some people when you're conjugating adjectives is when you want to negate them. You want to, the negative version, just like what we did with the verbs. So it's a little intimidating, but it's actually really straightforward. So for E adjectives, you just cut the last E and you change it to kunai, or you transform the last E into a ku and add nai, if you want to think of it that way. Either way is fine. All you have to really know is that the last E, if we go back and look at kawaii, you just cut the last E and add kunai. So kawaikunai means not cute, or tanoshi was to have fun, right? If we go back here, you cut the E, becomes tanoshikunai. It's not fun, tanoshikunai. Now for na adjectives, you do not say kunai. Kids do this all the time in Japan, Japanese kids, so don't be afraid to make mistakes with this, because kids do it as well, right? It's perfectly okay to make mistakes with this, and people will know what you're trying to say. But it's wrong to say shizuka kunai, right? It's shizuka janai. Janai, right? Jarimasen, which is actually like the negative of arimasu, which is to have. Anyway, that's a long story. Shizuka janai is the informal negative for not adjectives. Kyushu Trail. Hey people, he says. Hey man, how you doing? Thanks for joining. Check out Kyushu Trail too if you haven't. He does videos of hiking on mountains all over the northern island of Japan. Something that I hope to do with him one day. With Dan as well. All right. So the last thing we're going to cover today is just a little bit about informal conversation, and I think some other people here can help with that too, and that is that informal conversation, like using these conjugations for negative, like informal negative, present tense, verbs, etc., and just like adjectives on their own, the people you would have this kind of conversation with is generally friends and family. So with your mom or with your dad or with your brothers and sisters or your close friends, right? People who you're really close with. Also with equals. So people who you are considered equal with at work, people who started at the same time and are the same age as you, this is the way you would talk with them. Also subordinate, so people who are younger than you or lower in rank than you at work, like they haven't been there as long, and also children. You generally aren't going to be using mas forms or formal Japanese with children. You can, but it's a little awkward. You can also use it, especially as a foreigner, with people you're just very comfortable with. Like, I get away with using informal Japanese with old guys just because I become comfortable with them and they're fine with it. But I feel like Japanese people my age, no matter how comfortable they are with those older people, they probably will not be using informal conversation. But as a foreigner in Japan, you basically get a free pass to use informal Japanese whenever you want, which is another reason I always suggest people learn informal Japanese first. The books don't teach it that way. Well, these don't. The Tai Kim book that I just reviewed, there's a video for that on my channel. That one does cover informal Japanese first, which is something I really, really liked about it. Because if you learn that first, for starters, it's easier. It's much easier to remember because it's all shorter. And if you can remember it easier, it's easier to use it really fast. And the other thing is you can actually use that in shops and stuff as well. So when you're at the convenience store and you're looking for something, like you can be polite, but it's perfectly fine to just be, informal. Because, unfortunately, as the customer, I don't know if that's unfortunate enough, but as the customer, you are considered above the clerk or whatever. So it's perfectly normal to speak informally to them. So, if you want to be more polite, that's perfectly fine. I usually am, but it's not uncommon. So I think it's just more practical to learn informal Japanese first, because especially as a foreigner learning Japanese, you can get away with it anyway, and it's easier. So be careful. There's a wombat on the loose, says Come to Japan Dan. He says. All right. So another thing I really wanted to cover really quickly is that questions in informal conversation do not end in ka, which is the question marker. They just end with a rising intonation. So, for example, doko iku, right? Doko iku. So that little rising intonation at the end says that it's a question. Doko iku means where do you want to go? Doko iku, right? You wouldn't say doko iku ka. It's just wrong. You don't add ka there. If you were being more formal, you would say doko ni ikimasu ka, right? That's the formal version of that. See, it's much longer. It's harder to remember than just saying doko iku. Which is why I recommend learning it first. So, mite kurete arigato. Thank you for watching. Mata asobi ni kite ne. Come hang out again. So that is the end of the lesson. It was short. Very short. And that was because I felt like it was a lot of information for people who are just starting that might be picking up this conjugation first. And all of the things that come after this part of the lesson require those conjugations. So if you're not comfortable with the informal negative yet, then you won't be able to learn what comes after it in that lesson properly, like tabenaide kudasai, like don't eat and stuff like that. If you can't make that, if you can't make what we covered today, the conjugations, you're not going to be able to use those things. So I'm suggesting, I know a lot of people are watching this on the replay, based on the comments and stuff. I suggest that you learn this stuff as good as you can and then come back next week where I'll cover how to actually use it in way more grammar structures. That's why they go over knife, like the negative first, because it's used in many other grammar structures.